Well, we're excited because we're big comic book fans, and we're going to welcome on as a guest writer Dave Baker. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Dave, we got some sneak previews of the new Voyager comic coming out, as well as your new comic book, Night Hunters. Tell us, how did you get into comics?
Yeah, I've been into comics since I was a kid. I I started reading comics when I was like really young with like Tintin and kind of like European comics, and then from there I got into like traditional big two superhero stuff, and then kind of in the same arc a lot of people have, I got into indie comics from there. Um, and yeah, I've been like self-publishing and making comics for I mean I don't even know at this point, over a decade. Um, and some of my books include Action Hospital, Fuck Off Squad, Shitty Watchmen, and Shitty Dark Knight. And now I'm working on Star Trek, which is super fun because I'm a huge Star Trek fan.
Well, first let's talk about your new comic book, Night Hunters. It's reminiscent of something that would be in 2000 AD.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you picked up on that. That's totally one of the kind of key creative influences on the book. The book is put out through Floating World Comics, and it's written by me and drawn by Alexis Sirrett of Space Riders and Tarantula fame. And yeah, it's kind of it follows two brothers who are on opposite sides of this kind of controversial law that gets enacted in the near future in Venezuela, where if you want to have a baby in a hospital, run for public office, or rent an apartment, you have to have been or currently be a police officer. And so one of the brothers ends up kind of enlisting and becoming a cop, and the other one ends up kind of taking up a life of crime in order to try and get by. And so the story kind of focuses on this kind of teeter-totter of power between the two of them. The kind of like remit for when we started Night Hunters was that I wanted to write something for Alexis to draw that would kind of feel like a Paul Verhoeven movie, or like a really good Judge Dredd story. Something kind of dystopian and futuristic and with a political edge, but also have like some really cool genre elements and like big fight scenes and like basically just cool shit for Alexis to draw. So I'm glad that you guys definitely picked up on the 2000 AD thing, because that was definitely one of our primary kind of go-to talking points.
So let's talk about your Star Trek comics. So it's Star Trek Voyager 7's Reckoning. So where did you get the idea for the plot for this?
Yeah, Seven's Reckoning started because I worked on some of the other Star Trek comics, the WayPoint special, and
Which we love, by the way.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I was really excited about how that came out. My partner Nicole Gu and I did a story in I think it's the 2019 or 2018 WayPoint special. I don't even remember at this point because time has no meaning. But yeah, so we did an Esri Dax story in that WayPoint special, and the editor for that project reached out to me earlier this year and was like, "Do you want to pitch for a Voyager miniseries?" And I'm a huge Voyager fan, and Tuvok is my favorite Star Trek character, period, and I love 7 of 9, so I was like, hell yeah, I want to. That sounds like a ton of fun. So I pitched this idea where Voyager is kind of coming, it's on its journey back to Earth, and they run into this kind of like intergenerational colonization vessel, and the main kind of crux of the story is that they go on board and they find that there's a crew of aliens that have been in hypersleep, and they've kind of been lost drifting through space for an extended period of time. And the Voyager crew discovers that this race of aliens has two sects, like an upper class and a lower class. And the lower class is kind of this like indentured servitude, almost slave labor class. And so Voyager makes a deal with the alien crew of like, well, we will lend you 7 of 9's technological know-how in order to help you get back on your feet, and then you can just like give us supplies, because our journey home is long and arduous. So they do this, and 7 of 9 kind of gets sucked up into their culture and starts asking questions and kind of exposes the inequities or injustices within their society to a couple of the aliens, and it kind of causes this commotion and almost like a cultural uprising. And it's kind of inspired by the TNG episode Outcast, and a little bit inspired by the Enterprise episode Cogenitor. I'm a big fan of Trek stories where one or two of our crew members kind of get sucked up into an alien culture, and then either they learn about it or they learn things about themselves through this alien culture. I think it's a really kind of beautiful metaphor when done correctly for the enduring spirit of humanity, and how malleable and elastic it can be, which is a very long-winded way of answering your question.
Well, but it's great though. It's a very, like you said, a very classic Star Trek story about classism and about like say one species and how they treat two different classes of their species. That's a very interesting story to tell.
The one we did about Ezri Dax is about, like, it's a possible future where after DS9 she's working on an asteroid that's like a kind of a way station during a new civil war where the Federation might be kind of coming apart, and there's fractious relationships within the different factions of people that make up the Federation, and this asteroid is being attacked by Andorians, so Ezri Dax needs to get a bunch of these kind of medical patients off of the asteroid into like this shuttle to get to safety, and so she has to use all of her former past selves' knowledge to get out. Like, oh, this one's the gymnast one, so she has to use that knowledge to like leap from this thing to that thing to this thing, and this one's the engineer, so she has to use that knowledge to reroute wiring guidance systems or whatever. And yeah, all of the WayPoint stories are kind of, like I said, bite-sized.
I consider them more like an alternate history.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a lot of them are kind of like possible futures or possible, alternate pasts. Yeah, definitely. I first got into Trek in like a weird back door where my grandma she knew I liked Star Wars, so she taped, I think Star Trek 4 was on TV, and so she taped it off of TV, like off a cable or something, and gave it to me thinking it was a Star Wars movie, and I watched it and was very confused. I was like, I don't really understand anything that's happening. Like, who is this like guy in a white bathrobe? Like, this is so strange. But I liked it. I was kind of, it's one of those things where it was almost like a puzzle where you were trying to figure out, like, I can tell that there's something that comes before this, and I think I've heard of stuff that comes after, but I don't really know. Like, I kind of knew who Jean-Luc Picard was, but I didn't know what that meant. I just knew, like, there's a bald guy in a red jumpsuit named Jean-Luc Picard. And so I was, like, kind of confused that he wasn't the main character, because for some reason I thought he was like the Luke Skywalker of Star Trek. But that was kind of like my first intro to it. And then from there, I really, obviously got consumed by it and became a lifelong Trekker. So like I went and I figured out how to, get old VHS copies of the original show and the movies up to that point. And then I kind of like made my way into TNG because it was in syndication, and I would watch that on syndication on TV, and then from there just kind of, slowly got subsumed by Star Trek and became a hardcore Trekker.
So you're saying The Next Generation was your first Star Trek?
I guess technically the movies were the first, but the first show that I would watch religiously was Next Generation. Yeah, it's an amazing show. There's a reason why we're all still talking about it 30 years later or whatever. Yes,
and they made, of course, Picard now, which is basically a spinoff of The Next Generation and partially Voyager.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm hoping that a bunch of the DS9 characters will show up in whatever new Trek plans they have, because DS9's my favorite show.
Oh, I love DS9 too. Yeah, it would be great to see some of those characters again.
So I'm curious, being a Star Trek fan and a comic book fan, did you follow the comic books growing up?
Yes and no. I I had a bunch of the weird like Marvel motion picture era back issues as a kid, but I didn't really like them because they were so different. And then I really got into the DC like Peter David era stuff, and I
Oh,
really
they
liked
were
that.
amazing.
Yeah, yeah, I like that stuff a
Michael
lot.
Jan Freeman, that era of DC Star Trek was pretty impressive.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I really like the fact that the stories felt kind of they felt like Star Trek. They weren't comics that where they were, you know how like early Star Wars comics and that motion picture era that I was talking about, like they kind of just like they start out feeling like the original thing, and then they kind of just by necessity of trying to do new things, they just like go off into another direction, and they're just kind of like telling stories that are wildly, different in tone than the show. I loved the fact that the Michael Jan Freeman and the Peter David and especially the likenesses for the original series stuff that DC put out, like the Tom Sutton drawn issues are just so rad. Like I love Tom Sutton. He's amazing.
Oh, totally agreed. And the Jerome K. Moore covers, I think, are iconic.
Yeah, absolutely. I always wanted the interiors to look like him. Like I mean, I know that he probably was really slow and used a lot of photo reference, but they were so great and so detailed. I would just like lust after them, being like, God, if there was just one issue that could look like this on the inside.
Well, tell you what, we love the new artwork, or I should say the new comic that you have, the Voyager comic, the artwork in there by Angel Hernandez. What's it like working with Angel? Because his work is beautiful.
Oh yeah, his work is great. I love the way that he handles likenesses too, where they are kind of photo referenced, but they're not stiff. Like he's actually drawing. He's not just tracing photos. And I really love the way he handles backgrounds and like drawing like schematics of ships and stuff. Like there's so many points in the Voyager Seventh Reckoning stuff that I wrote that was like, okay, Angel, put them inside of like a cargo bay with lots of really cool wires and like computer parts. Just make it cool. And he just turns in amazing page after amazing page. It makes me look really good. Like I don't I don't have to do all that much. I just have to be like, all right, please make this great, and he does.
So, what did you think about how he did the aliens? Did you give him a description and then he took it from there?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was kind of a collaborative thing between Angel, me, and the editor Chase. I came up with the idea of having them be like lizard people, just because I like lizard people. I like dinosaurs and monsters. And my thought being, so much of that Berman era Trek is just like forehead of plants of the week whenever there's a new alien. So I really wanted us to try and like still be fidelitous to what they could accomplish on the show, but also push things in a new direction, and really try and make something original and cool that would feel of a piece with the Voyager era stuff, but still be exciting in a new way. And so I had kind of basically just described them, as the upper class being like thin reptilian people with two arms, and the lower class being like big brute looking dudes that are lizard dudes with four arms. And Angel just knocked it out of the park. I think he maybe did like 2 or 3 different iterations, and then Chase and I gave a little bit of feedback, but I mean he basically nailed it from the get-go. He really just ran with it and did great work. I think they look awesome.
It's the way you're describing your collaboration is very similar to the way David Michelini described Venom to Todd McFarlane and said, this is the basic idea, just make it look cool.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that I hope that we have half the success with this book that McFarlane and McLeany have, with Venom and Black Suit Spider-Man and that whole era of Amazing, because that stuff is great. I also hope that I'm a little bit more understanding than David Michelini, because in recent times he seems like he's a little grumpy, which kind of bums me out because I really like his work a lot. Sometimes in interviews he's kind of a curmudgeon, and it's always weird when you're like, oh, I love this guy, and that guy's like, meh, meh, meh. And you're like, aw, I really wanted you to be cool. But yeah,
Well, we go to a lot of conventions, and we've learned to separate the creator from the creation. It's just more of a defense mechanism for us. But the good thing is we don't have to do that for you because you're a cool guy all around.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I've had to do that too. I think especially in comics where it's people sitting alone in a room for 30 years. It's understandable where someone might become jaded or a little bit warped socially, or still be a really nice person, but maybe just doesn't handle being at a convention setting the best. So I try to be very forgiving when I interact with creators that I really, really like, and it's not exactly like, a walk in the park. I'm always like, well, it's a convention. I'm sure that, if we were like hanging out at their house or in their studio in their comfort zone, that probably would have gone a little bit better. But then again, you got people like Todd McFarlane, who's like the fucking carnival barker up there, just, yammering away.
All right, another thing that we love about your comics is that you're dialogue heavy, that we can actually get our money's worth. We're reading it, we're letting it soak in. How do you feel about approaching dialogue in the comic book form?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I think what you're kind of hitting on is almost kind of like density per page almost, and kind of like narrative
Totally, it's like
progression.
Chris Claremont.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so Star Trek. Star Trek has more dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much technobabble in Star Trek. I mean, it's almost like Shakespeare or something, where it's like, does anybody really know what like a EPS manifold is? No, but I can tell you like a handful of episodes off the top of my head where they say EPS manifold like 100 times, and so yeah, I think that's definitely something that I have put a special effort into, because comics, honestly, they're too expensive. Like, they just are. Like, no comic should be $5 or $4. Like, it sucks. And if I had the control to make them not that, they would be, but I don't. So they're $4 or whatever. I just feel like when you're making a story that costs freaking $4, you need to be respectful of the reader and really try and use that real estate to the best of its ability, and really try and build out that space to be as kind of Byzantine and cathedral like as possible, because $4 is a lot of money. You can do a lot of things with $4, and spending it for 6 minutes of comics entertainment isn't particularly alluring to most people. It's not to me. Like, when I buy comics and it's 7 double page splashes, I'm always like, oh man, really? So yeah, I definitely want, hopefully, the goal, will I always succeed? I don't know, but the goal is to make something that is both a part of a continuing narrative and also something that feels like a hopefully, if not a complete meal, a very large portion of a meal,
Oh, it's what you're producing is fantastic, because that's one of the things that we love about Trek is the dialogue. That's what separates it from some other science fiction. It's not just a fight fest. And your comics definitely come across as that it's more thought-provoking. How was this miniseries for Voyager presented to you?
Chase basically said, do you want to pitch for this Voyager miniseries? CBS wants to do something set during the original run of Voyager, and they want it to be, like heavily featuring Seven of Nine, because she's obviously kind of rising in popularity due to Picard. And I was like, that sounds great to me. I can do both of those things. And so then, the story I pitched ultimately takes place in between Scientific Method and Year of Hell Part 1. And Obviously, Seven is the main protagonist in the comic. her. It's kind of a two-hander. It's her and the main alien Grebe, as they sort of kind of, you know, work together to try and solve this problem, and then kind of get to know each other a little bit more and learn about their separate cultures, and kind of have foster this exchange of ideas that then kind of in some ways exposes the mistruths or shortcomings of Grebe's culture, where the alien culture in Seven's Reckoning all revolves around story. So like they refer to their spaceship as a narrative, and they call their main leader, like their queen, basically the grand protagonist. And the culture revolves around these stories, and that stories in their view kind of repeat and rhyme with each other. So when, you know, it kind of develops this caste system almost of like, when you're born into a specific role, that is the role that you're going to play for the rest of your life. And because of that, the people in positions of power can subjugate large groups and use them to do their bidding. And, you know, the whole thing is kind of this metaphor of the stories that we tell each other like really matter, and the stories that we tell ourselves matter most of all. And that, you know, the indomitableness of the individual is the greatest kind of force in existence. But you have to stand up and say that, you know, I am not going to take this anymore. And without that, nothing happens. You know, it's the individual responsibility is where it starts and stops, if that makes any sense.
It is an interesting story, and without giving away spoilers, I wanted to mention how 7 of 9 says that the Borg don't have any stories, and Tuvok says, well, and then what does that say about the Borg? That was just a great take on it, and how the aliens, they live around telling stories, but 7 cannot relate to that.
Thank you. Yeah, I was I was pretty excited when I kind of had that, 2 a.m., doing the dishes, like, oh, the Borg are hive mind. They don't need stories. They all just share memories, of course. That can be like a weird, good character building moment for 7 of 9.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I was pretty excited about that. I'm glad that worked for you. I think that moment and the moment with Tuvok and Janeway in the hallway where he's talking about her haircut, those are the two, like, me personally, those are like as soon as I got the word that it was a go, we were going to actually do it, I was like, okay, this might be the only time I get to write Star Trek stuff. What are the things that I want to do? Like, what are the character beats that like only I could bring to it, or the moments that I've always thought they should have done. And it was always strange to me that no one ever like mentioned the fact that Janeway was constantly changing her hair.
I love that. I love, again, dialogue. I love the dialogue between asking Tuvok what she thought about the haircut.
Thank you. Yeah, really? I like I said, Tuvok is my favorite character in all of Star Trek, and I feel like after 7 of 9 shows up, he just kind of gets relegated to the background a little bit, which is understandable, like why the writers, there's this new character, there's a lot of popularity, she's a young, attractive woman, like of course you're going to write for that. It's going to be exciting and cool, and you've been writing for these other characters for 4 years. Like, I get it. But there's a small part of me that's like, oh, but there's so much like missed opportunity where, Janeway obviously has this kind of maternal relationship with 7, and 7 is, kind of in the same model as Data and Spock, of a person learning to embrace their humanity. Like, that's a perfect place to kind of slot in Tuvok as almost this like pseudo emotion mentor. You know what I mean? Where he could help her relate to people as someone who also doesn't really have emotions. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why there's a few key Tuvok scenes over the course of the book, because I, kind of am just obsessed with him. So I was like, gotta use Tuvok. Gotta put him in here as many places as possible.
And yeah, Tuvok and 7 can relate because they're very logical, and they don't understand the humor that that humans always produce all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, it's interesting that you said that CBS wanted this new Voyager series to come out. Your previous work from the WayPoint Special #1 back in 2018, you did Deep Space Nine. Was that presented to you or something that you volunteered to work on a Deep Space Nine story?
Yeah, no, that one I pitched for that. I think I pitched like 4 different ideas for what that short could be. I pitched, oh God, I'm sorry, bear with me because it's been a couple years. I pitched a Crusher story, a story about, oh gosh, what's his name? The hologram from DS9. Um,
Vic
the
Fontaine?
Yes, Vic. Yeah, yeah. I pitched a Vic story and I pitched a Julian Bashir story, and this Ezri Dax story. And CBS was like, it went through the pitch process, and the editors were like, oh, these ones are good, and maybe not those ones or whatever. And then it went all the way to CBS, and I think they kind of had final say on the Ezri Dax thing. I think those waypoints kind of get built almost kind of like a band where you have your kind of like lead singer stories where you've got like we got to have a Kirk story, and we got to have a Spock story, or we got to have a Picard story, like one of the big beloved characters, and then like, oh, we can have some mid-tier character stories, and then every book that they put out maybe gets like 1 or maybe 2 of the like kind of like D-list or kind of more obscure cult characters. And I think in that issue we lucked out, and they picked Ezri Dax as the like cult character that would be featured in that one.
Well, I remember when you did that one, you actually channeled previous hosts, and you showed us what goes on in the mind of Ezri, and I thought that was wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I would have loved to do a whole series like that where she really, because that's again one of the things that the show had so many wonderful strengths, and they did so much with both Jadzia and Ezri, but I felt like there could have been more use of those hosts sometimes. You know what I mean? Like the previous ones. Like it kind of felt like they didn't quite know how to do it at the time, where they're 9 times out of 10 they're just like, Dax doesn't really know anything more than a bunch of other people know. She's just kind of old. That's how we're gonna write it, is like an old strong person. And I feel like there's such an interesting dichotomy in somebody like a fresh host who might not have the internal strength that Jadzia Dax has, being guided by these previous versions of herself. And I know that's not literally how it works, but I just feel like there's potential there of you do an episode that's like that. Something happens and she starts seeing them around the ship, or they did episodes where the serial killer Dax comes back and all of this stuff. I just feel like there could have been more mundanity in that, which would have made it almost kind of more special. Like she's eating cereal for the first time or something, and one of the Daxes is like, I love cereal, and one of the other Daxes is like, I hate cereal. Like I feel like there's a lot of potential for both comedy and excitement in her character in general.
And I think it's fascinating how you're explaining to us how you have to pitch some stories and other stories CBS wants to promote. I mean, that's what's so unique about Star Trek comics. I don't think any other licensee handles their license in that way in the comic and literary field.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where the property is just so big, like there's so much, because it's, the Star Trek universe is the size of the Marvel universe almost. Like there's so many characters from all of these different shows and comics, and there's also just hundreds of characters that haven't existed outside of the era that they were originally created in. Like a bunch of the Klingons from the DC stuff that we were just talking about. Like what's that guy's name? Bearclaw or whatever? Like,
oh yes. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, like that guy hasn't been in anything since then. Or Emrys is another perfect example. Like she's kind of relegated to the animated series and then those comics, and that's it. Like she doesn't really show up anywhere else. And I mean, maybe that's because the fan base isn't particularly attached to any of them, because Star Trek comics tend to be a little bit kind of like an enclosed cul-de-sac where Star Trek comics are only read by Star Trek fans, as opposed to, maybe some more other comics which are a little bit more accessible to the average comics reader, maybe. But it's always such a shame to me that there's not more shine given to some of these characters who are kind of now just relegated to back issue bins, and will quite honestly probably never be seen again in any meaningful way. Like, what's the romantic lead in Star Trek 3? Like, 4 in Star Trek 4?
Jillian Taylor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like why wasn't she in Star Trek 5? Like, it seems like such a missed opportunity that character is like, finally they subvert the trope of having Kirk fall in love with someone and then having them, be left in their original circumstances at the end of the episode, and they bring that person with them to the future, to space, and then never use them again. Like, I've always wondered what happened to that person and where she ended up and why they haven't brought her back. Like, put her on Picard. Have her be some super old scientist that's been experimenting on herself or something. I don't know. Maybe she's using whale DNA or some shit. Who knows?
Okay, so let me ask you this. If you were invited to work on the next Picard miniseries, would you throw that little Easter egg in there for us?
I mean, I would love to do that. The reality is, knowing how things work, I don't think I would pitch that, just because I don't think anybody outside of the three of us really wants that story. I might try and sneak her in there in the background somewhere, but I don't think that that's one, like I was saying, the cult players, the cult characters, like that's a perfect WayPoint story, because it's not somebody that has a huge fan following, that we could do something cool with. But they're not going to do a team up of her and Jean-Luc Picard. That's just not going to happen. I wish. I would love that. I would write that in a heartbeat.
I'd be happy with a background mention.
Yeah. Well, then, you know what? Let's put it this way. If I if I get that gig, I'm gonna be wrangling on putting that in there for sure.
So did you see anything in Picard? Well, watching the show, did you see like something from 7 of 9 that you used in your comic story? Any characteristics?
Yeah, most of the stuff with 7 of 9 that I kind of mined was directly from the like original Brannon Braga Voyager era stuff. I like what they did with her in Picard. I love the idea of her as this kind of like space sheriff. I think it's really interesting. With the Fenris Rangers before meeting up with Picard and everything. I think that's really cool. And I hope they do more with her. I'm excited for the new season. But I actually made like charts where I went through and I watched the last half of season 3 again and the first half of season 4 again, and I made charts of where all the characters were, character interactions with 7 that were meaningful, and specifically vocal tics where like there's the episode where Harry Kim goes and talks to 7 a couple times and he kind of has a crush on her, and Chakotay is like, I think she finds you easy to talk to, dude, or whatever. And there's a point in issue 2 where they're trying to get information from her, and Harry Kim says, you can tell me anything, 7. I know that you think I'm easy to talk to. So like, there's a bunch of stuff like that where like most of the characters in the book at certain points have direct vocal tics that were either in the show or are just in line with how they speak in the show. Like, I mean, this is an easy one, but whenever you're writing 7 of 9 and she doesn't understand something, she just says explain. Like, that's one of her tics. She just says explain. And
you nailed it, though. You really did nail that. We could tell that you put some research into it, and we very much appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where I'm such a huge Star Trek fan that like if that wasn't there, I would be bothered by it, you know? Like I'm also a really big X-Men fan, and a while ago there was a certain writer who took over the X-Men and was writing characters that have very concrete, specific ways that they speak, and he wasn't making them speak that way. And I was like, oh, I just instantly know that you don't care about this thing that I care about, and that makes me not like this as much. Even if the story is great, even if the art is great, there are certain like lampposts that if you just tip your hat at, you just instantly endear yourself to the reader. And I know because I'm one of those people. Like, it's really easy. You just make Wolverine say bub, and you have Storm refer to everyone by their whole first name, regardless of what it is. Like, she calls Hank McCoy Henry, you know? Like, it's those big signposts, like just easy characterization slam dunks they're not that hard to do. With just a little bit of effort, it really helps. You know, the stories are often, you know, made or they make or break in their details, you know, it's the little kind of granular things. It's like the thing you mentioned about Tuvok being like, oh, what does that tell us about the Borg, that they don't have stories? Like those little character moments, 9 times out of 10, at least for me, when I'm reading a story, those character beats are the thing that really stick out and really kind of make the experience worthwhile. It's almost kind of like the plot is the way that I get to those little character things, because those are the things that I really love, you know, of spending time with these fictional people that are like, you know, in some cases more important to me than my fucking family. Like I really wanted to make sure that I was fidelitous and true to as much of that as I can be. And did I get some of it wrong? I don't know. Maybe I did. I'm sure Star Trek is huge, so I'm sure that there's something somewhere that I must have overlooked, but I really did, you know, give it the good old college try, as they say.
Well, we've been very pleased with your work so far. Definitely look forward to the coming Night Hunter series, which we read the preview copy. Let's close with that. Tell us, our listeners, what they can expect about Night Hunters and why they should enjoy it and buy it just like us.
Yeah, so like I said, you know, it's this future dystopian world, you know, Venezuela 100 years in the future, this dark kind of cyberpunk crime comic. And, you know, if you like stuff like Judge Dredd or RoboCop or Starship Troopers or, you know, Blade Runner, Philip K. Dick novels in general.
Oh, yeah, we definitely saw that Blade Runner influence, which we love. We love that idea of that gritty society.
Yeah, I really, you know, like I said, you know, Alexis and I built it together. He's originally from Venezuela, so it's a really deeply personal story to him, because it's about literally the place that he's from in this kind of like alternate potential future, which at this point in time, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to what's happening in Venezuela right now, but it is not good. So,
well, we don't want to give spoilers, but it's one of those comics that it's in the realm of Watchmen. It forces you to think.
Well, that is a high praise. I really appreciate that. That's very, very nice of you. And we might have to put that on the back cover of the next book, because goddamn, that's some high praise right there, my friend.
Well, we mean it sincerely.
Okay, so before we go, can you tell our listeners when your comics will be released and where they can find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. Star Trek Voyager 7's Reckoning comes out November 11th in comic book stores everywhere. Night Hunters #1 from Floating World Comics by me and Alexis Zurich comes out November 24th in comic book stores everywhere, theoretically, if they've ordered it. The second issue comes out in January for Night Hunters and is available for pre-order currently, if that's something that you're into. And you can find me on the internet on my website, heydavebaker.com, or on Instagram at xdavebakerx.
All right, awesome.
Well, thanks again, Dave, for giving us some insight on the comic book industry and getting into your brain, helping us to appreciate what we love about your work so much.
Yeah, thank you. It was really nice talking to both of you.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.